Thank you for joining us for another episode of Channel Revelations. I'm Ethan Fox, and I'm here with Micheila Sheldan, and we'll be spending the next couple of hours talking about some interesting topics and ancient civilizations. And as I always say, Micheila is a trans channel, but I don't discuss any of these questions with her beforehand just because I don't want her conscious mind to interfere with any of the information that's coming through. So we'll be speaking directly to the guides and getting answers from them. So whenever you're ready, we can start.
All right, we're ready.
And who are we speaking with today?
We are always speaking with the Council of Light, knowing there are many different galactic beings who assemble from the 12th dimension. However, we are open to invite in anyone necessary to support this transmission today.
So I'm curious, every one of these sessions we've had, we have the Council of Light. Is there a particular reason why they're always in the background?
Well, we are not necessarily coming to only support these transmissions. Our intention as a whole is to oversee the ascension timeline on planet Earth, not that we're directing activities, in other words, but we come together as somewhat a representation of those who are present on planet Earth at the very beginning of time, supportive of the seeding of humanity, but also taking on various assignments that were intricate and especially focused on the evolution of humanity into a brand new race. And we are here now because we have seen so much of the divine blueprint or plan, in other words, of that evolutionary path become destructed or hijacked in a sense. So our role is to provide any information possible to facilitate both awakening as well as a raise in consciousness, such that humanity can override these very difficult blocks that stand in the way of their freedom and sovereignty.
Okay. Let me ask you about the ancient Egyptian god Thoth, or some people pronounce it Thoth. Was this an enlightened being?
We consider Thoth a enlightened being, yes.
Okay. And is that name something that humans came up with later, or is that actually what he goes by?
Well, keep in mind that at the time that a being like this was present, human language itself was quite different than what it is today. And in fact, language was more a pure representation of the sonic vibration of Earth. So putting a translation together in terms of how you would pronounce it today, we think it's adequate and representative of the name itself, although some of the differences that we would notice are more elongated vowels and sounds, but certainly, yes, that is the name.
So was this a hybrid being, or Syrian, or what particular lineage did he? And is it a he, or was it a what kind of an entity was this?
Thoth is an interesting representation of an intergalactic hybrid, mostly because it is not necessarily important what direct lineage he came from, other than he was a blending and a representation of many that humans would take on the embodiment of, not in a direct physical fashion so much, but many of the gods, for example, of this time, were a manifestation of light into form. And they took on the characteristics of many of their ancient past lives because that knowledge, the wisdom, in other words, was necessary to come through them in a vibrational translation. So imagine your DNA, for example, holding the cosmic lineage and blending of many different races, and you having access to that, but coming through a portal into another dimension. What might happen is you would take on the blended characteristics of many of these different races, or perhaps the ones that were most important to offer those who would intersect with you the Akashic information that would suit their evolutionary path. So we see Thoth in this way. Although we must say that we do see somewhat of an Arcturian lineage that comes through in a very prominent way in his disposition. Not exclusively, of course, but this is one, we'll say, very important past timeline experience or lifetime that was expressed through his DNA. And you've asked about his gender, we believe. And certainly, yes, we would call Thoth a male, even though, again, as a god or a goddess, there are very subtle deviations in terms of what you now know to be a male and a female in this modern day.
And if we were to qualify him as a particular dimensional being, is that even a relevant question that can be answered?
It is relevant, yet also difficult to determine, and this is why. What we notice about you and every other being throughout history, space, and time is that those that are operating in their divine structure, meaning there are no distortions or suppressions of energy, will adapt to whatever dimensional reality and information that they need to express. In other words, sometimes if a god or a goddess were leading a civilization that needed to access ninth dimensional information, they would very readily and easily adapt to that form. We can say, however, that we do see Thoth existing mostly in a 12th to ninth dimensional form, meaning he was accessing a variety of different energetic and physical manifestations of these various dimensions as necessary to do the work that he was set out to do at the time he was present in this incarnation.
So did he actually, now his existence physically on the planet, is it still continuing today, or is he no longer in the current timeline that we're experiencing?
Well, in terms of a physical manifestation, we don't necessarily see him existing right now on planet Earth in the same way. Yet it's important to note that gods, for example, that came to Earth, masters even with a very specific assignment, were trained in the rites of leaving their vibrational identity behind in many different forms. For example, writings, architecture, various symbology, because what they were here to do was not necessarily lead as a mentor and teacher directly, but to influence vibrationally an entire civilization. So certainly we see the influences of Thoth and access to those influences left behind. Yet we also see him as a member of this collective, for example, a guiding force in the human ascension timeline.
Okay, I'd like to bring Thoth through as well and to speak with him directly. So am I speaking with Thoth now? My question initially would be, so when I'm speaking to Thoth, am I speaking to that consciousness, or is it a collective that's being represented right now?
Every being that has ever existed throughout space and time in this universe is not one but many. So, as a master is speaking to another, they are tapping into the wisdom and energy of every lifetime they have ever lived beyond the incarnation that is requested. And this is of most importance. So while certainly there is an interaction with the one who was known as Thoth, the access goes well beyond that. And this you will find once you transition beyond this earth and into a form of light. It is as if you will remember your name and all that you were in each individual lifetime, while also recognizing it as one and the same.
In ancient Egyptian times, you were referred to as Thoth, but in Greek times, you were referred to as Hermes, or Hermes thrice great. And are these both the same person, or was this a later adaptation that is not true to who you were?
Well, it isn't necessarily the same individual being, but there is a lineage here that is most important to consider because as a being comes to planet Earth from a multidimensional form or existence, it is pulling and drawing from every other thing it has ever been before. And these lineages were extremely important during some of the periods in which Hermes, for example, or Ra, for example, or Thoth were present. There was a complete history that came along with that individual. And even though that history may have changed hands, it was built upon and utilized in perfect succession to what needed to take place in that timeline. So while certainly we can affirm that there is a strong connection between these two beings, we prefer to look at it more as a lineage or a continuation of that lineage between two different realities.
Well, there are certain teachings that are attributed to Hermes and other teachings that are referred to Thoth. So what I'm curious about is, are these all consistent with your teachings?
They are consistent. They are consistent in terms of their origins, their purpose, and how they are meant to be translated, yet stood individual of themselves such that they could accompany the one who was expressing them through. In other words, we see no dividing force in purpose or translation, other than very slight changes in interpretation or the delivery of these teachings.
In the late 1920s, early 1930s, a gentleman by the name of Maurice Doreal went to, supposedly, was met by some members of the Great White Brotherhood and was supposedly given a number of tablets that were that he referred to as the Emerald Tablets, which is different from the Emerald Tablet that Hermes was known for. And he claims to have physically been given these at the Great Pyramid, and that he translated them into some teachings of yours, or it essentially reads as a recitation of life lessons and knowledge. But there is some question as to whether or not he actually physically received these and translated them, or if he channeled them or achieved them in some other way. Can you confirm whether these are your teachings, and or if this was just some made up thing?
The physical tablets themselves are actually an energetic and auricular vibration that has sustained itself through time, not meaning necessarily there was never a physical and tangible set of tablets that was able to be handed from one to another. But keep in mind that the teachings that I brought through were not my own exclusively. They were brought in through what many would consider God, universe, prime creator. So the essence of any channeling is vibrational at its core, which ultimately means it cannot be destroyed, even if in the physical plane it becomes lost or damaged. But because it is vibrational, what you have to consider is that it will not appear nor be able to become interfaced with in a physical sense unless there is a direct match of consciousness. Now, the individual that you speak of, we affirm is of that level of consciousness to have been able to access that information, yet to assume that there is a possession of that material would actually limit its power. It could never be possessed by one individual in order to be shared with an entire collective. So we see this as more of a time-traveled or channeled event where there was a meeting perhaps in the astral plane, of many who transferred the information to him in a very direct and deliberate way. The tablets themselves, however, while of course being very mystical in a technology in and of themselves, are imbued with a sort of, we'll say, resonant force, meaning within the field around them are codes. And the purpose for this was to protect them somewhat from those who would have hidden them from others, or somehow taken them and tried to manipulate or change them from their original form. And this is also important to add in the conversation, because if that resonant force was still present and it was timeless and technological in nature, it would not be able to be interfaced by a human being. If I am a hybrid, and if all that I was accessing existed beyond the veil, and that was transferred in a vibrational form into a physical technology, that physical technology still exists today and is waiting for someone of my caliber, or perhaps a culmination of many on planet Earth, who are accessing that energy to be able to receive them, if we are making sense.
I understand what you're saying, but I'm curious why you're attributed with emerald tablets. There, not only Maurice claims to have seen emerald tablets, or at least channeled them, but even in earlier teachings, or in the teachings of Hermes, there was the assumption of an emerald tablet, or a single emerald tablet in that case. So what's it? Was there originally a physical third dimensional emerald tablet that originated this idea?
So first, keep in mind that any tablet, emerald or otherwise, of that period would not have been third dimensional in its process or in its manifestation, because the dimension that I and others existed in was completely different. And we were using technologies that are not present on Earth today, or even energetic processes and modalities, for example, to imbue all that we were teaching within the Earth, or within very prominent areas where potent ley line crossings existed or planetary alignments would take place. Because our hope was that the vibration of the teachings themselves would be sent out in all directions of the Earth, such that they would become no less potent than a technology, lifting the vibration and consciousness of others. The emerald nature, however, is not necessarily related to the stone or the precious gem emerald, so much as it is the imbuing of a specific ray of consciousness. We interpret this color as a healing ray coming through many different ascended masters. It is a difficult explanation, but we want to share it here such that everyone understands, or has a window into how we were transcribing things, and the importance of their, we'll say, vibration and physical manifestation. If you look today at an ancient temple, for example, or a pyramid, or a energetic device left behind from ancient times, it was architected in co-creation with many intergalactic beings. Some of these being on ships, others being masters in a form of light. And those on the earth were conduits orchestrating this entire process, meaning through our intention, through our practice, and through our energy field, we were preparing ourselves to become the pillars of light on the earth plane for the combined effort of many in the astral plane, bringing something to full fruition. If we look at the emerald tablets, this is a collaboration well beyond myself. I, being the conduit on Earth, channeling the information from multiple sources and realities, even the Akashic records or universal law, you might say, working in concert with different dimensional and interdimensional beings to support the energetic transference of it. And the color imbued in the emerald representation of it was somewhat like a magnetic hue that, in the presence of another, would alchemically change them. It's very similar to the construction of a portal or a pyramid, for example. Some understand today that they visit these areas and they are physically and vibrationally changed the moment they step into them. And it is no different than the process of creating these tablets. For example, those who constructed the pyramid made sure that it was holding the not only vibrational equations and mathematical symmetry to support a chain of events through which a soul was forever changed. And that is ultimately how I left behind my own legacy beyond the tablets. In fact, we're looking here at a manifestation of a technology, not just a physical capture, we'll say, of information that could be shared for intellect or logic alone.
So getting back to Maurice Doreal, now he was associated with the Theosophical Society and Blavatsky, who we discussed in our previous conversation. And in our previous conversation, we discussed how Blavatsky also didn't actually physically interact with Agartha or Shambhala or the people of that place, that it was channeled information. And because it was channeled information, there might have been some biases or thought processes that filtered that knowledge so that it ultimately wasn't 100% true to what they were teaching in Shambhala, for example. Now, in the case of Maurice, he was also associated with the Theosophical Society. And if what you're saying is that he also channeled this information, which he referred to as the Emerald Tablets, is that information that is in the book that he wrote, which is a translation of the Emerald Tablets that he channeled, is that accurate to what you were teaching?
So the two situations you're describing here are slightly different in how they manifested. For example, to time travel into a place like the inner earth is quite a massive vibrational and physical experience for someone who is shape-shifting to that degree, meaning there will be so many interactions and different translations needing to be made of things never seen or sometimes even known before. And that's why we would say that there could be bias that gets in the way, because someone who exists on the surface of the earth, who is filtering a non-physical vibrational experience of traveling somewhere else through the mind, is going to, of course, not be able to literally make that translation in a very accurate sense, because human beings are all a bit different in how they experience their plasmic timelines where they travel beyond the earth. And they're all a bit different in how they would relay those experiences, both physically and emotionally. The tablets, however, they are a technology, and they are a very specific type of technology. So it's a bit different to interface with these as opposed to going somewhere like the inner earth that is very subjective. There is typically a direct transference of energy and information that comes from the tablets that is, while channeled and certainly run through the mind, more so an accurate depiction of the meaning and purpose behind them. So we are leaning towards saying that this translation you speak of is a bit more accurate in its depiction than the other. But remember, you stand today in a completely different dimensional reality than when I did, and many of these technologies were put into place. And so, certainly, there is going to be something lost in the translation, mostly because you are attempting to use the mind to understand it. And in so doing, are limiting your ability to fully receive the vibrational code in which they exist. And this, we can say, is very similar of any channeled work today, not to say that they are all of the same magnitude or importance of their expression. But anyone who is interacting with a channeled transmission, written or otherwise, is going to interpret it through their own experiences. They are going to interpret it through their consciousness. But the tablets themselves contained a code to override that. In other words, anyone who was able to directly interface with them, and we might say this individual is actually chosen to have this experience, will be carrying them into the reality that they existed in a very important, applicable way.
Okay, now you mentioned that we're interpreting this information through the mind. Now, first of all, before I get into that topic, one of the teachings that's associated with you is a text that's called the Kabbalion. Was that actually your teaching?
It is.
Okay. In the Kabbalion, the first statement that was made is all is mind, the universe is mental. So that seems to contradict a lot of the other things we talk about with other guides about mind and heart working in unison. But I do understand also the ancients referred to you as the Egyptian scribe, or the one who was a great teacher of a lot of intellectual knowledge, astrology, astronomy, apparently built the pyramids, things like that. So there appears to be a mental component, and you also made the reference, or at least the Council of Light made the reference earlier, of having that Arcturian lineage that is prominent, which would make sense because the Arcturians tend to be more intellectual and more inventors and technology based. So is that why this statement was made?
Well, there is an assumption that the word mental is being put into the same category as thinking or mind. But the true interpretation of this has to do with the universe being conscious and being alive, that there is actual thought process and reactions and responses of the universe to every single thing that is created within it. So it is somewhat a parallel expression to the origins of what many would call God. God, knowing of itself, became aware that it existed within a field. And that awareness was the very first process of thought in which an action took place. And in that action, there was a reaction. And then there was an understanding that everything was connected in symmetry. So this very statement is opening up the door to the understanding that everyone is a creator in connection to every other thing. And in so doing, forging one consciousness that is operating in symmetry.
Okay. In the Emerald Tablets of Thoth the Atlantean by Maurice, he references that you lived in the time of Atlantis and that it was a very enlightened age and so on. Is that true?
There is always an Atlantean connection with so many of the gods that we refer to today as being prominent in ancient civilizations, it is not necessarily because I was present there in the same form that I existed in Egypt and in other realities. But many of the, we'll say, elders that came into Atlantis to found and form that community came from a form of light, meaning they arrived in Atlantis to set the tone or the premise for how it would become an enlightened civilization. And certainly I was there in that form. But also the elder councils in Atlantis, those who came later, were interacting with astral councils no different than what you are doing today. So I would place myself on more of an astral and elder council interfacing with those in Atlantis, guiding and supporting them in the evolution of that civilization. But I took a very special role in terms of the interest of technology and the pyramids that existed in Atlantis. And much of that knowledge followed with me and others into Egypt.
Okay, so were you there from the very beginning of Atlantis or sometime later?
I was there more at the beginning, at the origins of that civilization in, I would say, a hybrid form, not unlike many others, but also coming in as a light teacher to offer guidance. Um, Perhaps you could say as an enlightened architect and technological master, supporting the evolution of the technologies there.
And did you pre-exist on Earth in a physical form prior to Atlantis, or was Atlantis your first appearance here?
There have been many incarnations prior to Atlantis
In this Thoth form.
in many other forms other than Thoth.
Okay. So the origins of Thoth, as we know of Thoth today, was in Atlantis then.
Yes.
And in that original form, did you have the appearance of what we see in the various artistry today, the sort of ibis bird-like head and the humanoid body?
Very similar, certainly, although some of these depictions are more representing the angelic interpretation that some would make of me. Hybrids came in and were able to take these forms on, not to necessarily appear different than others, but to show again a certain cosmic lineage. And while there was a great deal of Arcturian connection, as mentioned previously, there are so many others that were blended together as one. So, certainly, this is somewhat accurate to what I would have appeared as, while at the same time knowing, of course, that I was representing more of a human being in Egypt than I was the other.
A lot of modern day archaeologists believe that that it was just a headdress that you were wearing. Was this an actual physiological structure similar to what we see, or were you a human being wearing some sort of headdress?
Later in my life, I was wearing more of an ornate, and we'll say vibrationally resonant costuming. Not again to place myself in any position of hierarchy or leadership, but to show homage to the many elders and intergalactic beings that I was working with as a conduit on Earth.
So when you're saying the vibrational image that you were wearing, that was in the form of the bird or the ibis head. Is that
Yes,
correct? Okay.
correct.
What was the significance of that? Was there a particular reason that particular form was chosen?
Many in these civilizations would interact with ships or intergalactics coming into their environment. And they were depicted as a bird simply because of their ability to move between realms very swiftly. Some were seen to have actual wings and were interpreted as angels. So the bird imagery is somewhat a blending of many of these human interpretations of how intergalactics would appear as they were coming into their reality.
Well, how does that relate to the Anunnaki, who are also depicted as birds?
It's a very similar interpretation, although we would say that the Anunnaki that were present on planet Earth did carry more of those physical characteristics. I also have an Anunnaki background and lineage, although it is not associated so much with those who manifested on Earth. What you must keep in mind is very similar to the human collective. Any intergalactic race is a melting pot of other races. So the Anunnaki that exist off planet have seeded with other races and taken on different characteristics. Some of them have chosen to exist in a form of light and focus on more benevolent activities, and others to explore planets in a more physical form. So remember, I was accessing all of it as I was present on planet Earth. And that may also be why some of the depictions of me are shown in this bird-like format. The Anunnaki are depicted as very large, very massive in size, for example. And I also at times carried my material existence from the most massive state of light, and in using that wisdom and light would appear in a larger form.
Well, I'm noticing a connection here. You can tell me if I'm on the wrong track, but it seems like that when the bird form is used in ancient sculptures and so on, even carried to modern day iconography, there is an Anunnaki, or in the very least, a technological connection. It seems like the Anunnaki were very technologically based, and you also seem to have very technological, scientific, mathematical, analytical approach to things, or perspective. And we also seem to see that in the iconography of various countries today. Is there some connection there with that bird figure?
Certainly, we could agree with what you're saying that in this lineage, those who are present on planet Earth saw leaders in this area bringing very advanced technology from their star systems to the Earth and teaching others how to implement it. But also keep in mind that sometimes this was very benevolently focused, meaning these technologies were coming from the heart and in the intention of supporting unity consciousness, and other times not. So depending on how the depiction is represented, will show whether or not this was, or it was, more focused on a history that is not serving humanity, or one that was.
In the book, The Emerald Tablets of Thoth, the Atlantean, it is written that, so in the time of Atlantis, when you were living in that time, there was a description, or I'm going to refer to as you now. I'm going to assume that that book is accurate to what you were saying. So in that story, you describe that Atlantis was a very peaceful and thriving, advanced society, except toward the very end, due to some kind of an opening of a portal, some dark forces came through that portal, and that's what triggered ultimately the fall of Atlantis. Is that true, or can you add some more detail to that?
Certainly, I can add more detail here, and I want to preface this by saying that in my experience in Atlantis, there were some very sensitive and vulnerable periods where technology was preparing to upgrade, or the Atlanteans were accessing new and higher knowledge from spaceships and star beings like myself. And attempting to implement it in some way. And certainly, this is how portals like this became opened. It didn't always necessarily mean that they led to the entry of lower vibrational beings. However, as a mentor and guide of those at the ground level interfacing with these technologies, what I can say is that they were very powerful indeed. They were somewhat like a free energy device, using the vibrational waves of the universe, of water, of air, and combining all of that energy to send out in somewhat like a toroidal flow in the entire civilization. It was not only healing, but it also had the purpose of raising consciousness so that everyone was in a more balanced energetic state, but also accessing information from the universe. Now, in Atlantis, what began to happen was the technologies were being tested to see if they could be applied in different formats. They were always more collectively based, meaning the focus was never on an individual or a few groups of Atlanteans at once, because there was no need for this. In other words, we didn't necessarily have rampant disease where things had to be created in order to heal, nor areas where one or another were struggling. But there's always anticipation of a future that has not come, and this is where civilizations tend to go awry. Anytime there is fear about what has not yet manifested in a reality, that fear will carry those in charge in the wrong direction. And this is ultimately what happened. These technologies were tested to see if they could be utilized with very grounded level intentions to be able to change genetics, for example, to interface with bodies that were not healthy, or to even access the soul vibration and raise it up into a higher dimension to create councils that could oversee certain aspects of the civilization. And this is where we believe not a new portal was necessarily created, but many of the portals that had already been there in the form of pyramids, for example, began to, we'll say, become imbalanced. And this is a very technical understanding, but I want to simplify it by saying all of the pyramids that you see or even don't see or haven't even discovered yet from ancient civilizations all create an electromagnetic field together. So as one, the pyramid collective on planet Earth could restore the entire Earth and humanity in a very short period of time. And the model for this existed in Atlantis. But the second one of those pyramids goes offline, or something is changed in the architecture or the mathematics, or we might even say the symmetry or harmony of one of those structures, imbalances take place, and certainly beings can enter and take ownership of things that are not theirs, or take advantage of aspects of the technology. And this is where we see the entry of many into Atlantis that began to take possession of these various technologies and began to separate them individually and attempt to use them for their own personal advantage. Remember, these were elemental technologies. And that is the beginning of the end, because elements are alive, they are conscious, and when they are separated and focused on with malevolent intent, very unnatural balance comes into an experience. And you're somewhat having a dual or parallel experience of that today, where many of the natural elements of Gaia have been hijacked, they've been lowered in their genetic capability. There's been a great deal of separation, and all of that has led to the influx, we'll say, of a great deal of negative entities and beings that do not have your best interest in heart, and who have taken control, in other words, of your governments, and of perhaps we could say most everything on planet Earth. And from an elemental standpoint, that can lead to complete and total destruction.
So, what exactly came through this portal?
Well, you're asking us to clarify the type of being, for example,
Or energy or consciousness? What is it that came through that caused the destruction of Atlantis?
there were many Anunnaki portals that existed between the universe and Earth. And this goes back to the very beginning of Earth when she was a brand new planet, meaning many of us, Pleiadian, Anunnaki, Arcturian, Lyran, Sirian, and beyond, were so enamored that a new planet had come into being that there was a great deal of research and exploration. The Anunnaki have a very highly technical and adept ability to operate portals, to create them, and to help others interface with them to travel between different destinations. And they were some of the first to set up the portals that were entered to come to the planet Earth. However, their technologies also exist in these portals, not all of them, but some of them. And these technologies are somewhat like remote viewing devices, such that observations can be made of certain planets, star systems, or races. And this is, we'll say, a group of more malevolent Anunnaki who began to, we'll say, take ownership of these remote viewing technologies and utilize them for their own personal benefit. And when these portals opened in Atlantis, we do see some observations being made from the Anunnaki, and we would put them as a part of those who entered that civilization. Not exclusive, however, because anytime a portal becomes corrupted, or we'll say able to be passed without integrity, there are many different races throughout the universe who are apt to take advantage of that, mostly because there were very precious elemental resources on planet Earth, both within the DNA of the Atlanteans who existed in that civilization, as well as within and upon the physical Earth. In fact, many of the technologies that were created in Atlantis had been observed by others as valuable themselves. So a great many came with the interest of using those technologies for their own benefit.
Now, is this portal technology that you're talking about in any way being replicated today with the CERN Hadron Collider?
Yes, absolutely. We can say this is a similar manifestation to what we are speaking of. We might say that you are in the Atlantean time period yourselves. It is just that the spiral of time has brought you around to it in a very different way with different terminology and slightly different manifestations of these things, but nonetheless experiencing them almost identical to what has taken place there.
Now, are they intentionally trying to bring through some sort of lower vibrational entity using CERN, or is it really for the experimental purposes that they're stating?
What we're noticing here is there are a great deal of malevolent intents, certainly, but also a great deal of confusion by those who are involved in this technology as to what its potential is and how it should be directed. And ultimately, we think that is the biggest problem because it is a highly sensitive and powerful technology. And if those who are accessing it and have input in it are not all on the same wavelength in terms of how it should be used, the technology itself as a consciousness begins to take on that confusion. So certainly we see it as somewhat similar to a portal in that it has the ability to open up, how should we put this? Fields or spaces in which sensitive areas or passageways between the Earth and the universe exist. And in so doing, negative entities and beings can come through, but more so, the energy of that place becomes disrupted. So I want to take you back to the statement that I have made about the Pyramid Collective and how, as one, these individualized technologies form a field. And they are so strategically placed on the earth and in alignment with the universe that it would hold together, they would hold the earth in complete symmetry. But because they have become dismantled and somewhat broken, that symmetry is not there. CERN, for example, is doing the opposite. It's taking everything down and apart such that there's a weakening of both the human connection to the earth and universe, but also the very sensitive passageways and portals through which energy can be exchanged become weakened and even owned or corrupted, let's say, by a small group of individuals.
So, with the exception of the scientists who may not have any idea what they're doing, the people who are actually in control of this project, are they intentionally trying to do that, which you just described, and maybe bring through certain entities or even satanic influences?
At the highest level, certainly yes, but we want to make it very clear that there are a slight few at the highest level and many, many involved at other levels who have little understanding that their contribution is actually accomplishing this. But remember, satanic forces, they're not just one but many. And that's another important consideration to remember. It's a vibrational technology. So if we are lowering the vibration of the earth or very sensitive areas where consciousness can rise, we are allowing the earth itself to become vulnerable to the access and influx of many who do not have its best interest in mind.
There's some speculation that the name CERN came from the Celtic god Cernunnos. Is there any connection there?
There is certainly that history is very prominent in the power behind it and the intentions that are being stated here. And it isn't unusual, we think, for that history to be shown in the present moment. In other words, what you're seeing before your very eyes is historic symbology and connections between where you stand today and where history has come back again to repeat itself.
And how is Cernunnos related, that it's a history that's repeating itself through CERN?
We see this as somewhat of a malevolent energy or entity, not exclusively. Celtic energy, while it is also very known for spells and bringing in periods of peace and working energetically with the earth, also are known for manipulating those energies. So it's not necessarily a direct link or manifestation to this entity, but somewhat a remembrance of that time period and all of the things that were taking place back then. If we look at history, we'll sometimes see the remembrance of very immersive periods of working with energy and practicing in divination and using all of a soul's focus to manifest things. And many who are in power today are using these various techniques in conjunction with their physical abilities and resources to ensure that power is being assumed, in other words. So we see this more of a power inequality or using energetic prowess and techniques to accentuate a small group of souls' ability to manipulate an area or the whole of the planet.
Now, has CERN in any way influenced the turn of events over the last 10 or 20 years on planet Earth, where we've really rapidly accelerated to very dystopian, centralized, controlled world where the few are thriving in a financial means anyway, and the many are suffering and struggling, plus a lot of very dystopian ideas are being brought to the world right now. Did CERN in any way manipulate the timeline to produce that result?
So not directly. What we want to acknowledge is that timelines are created by the beings that exist within them. But what we notice about this technology is that frequency is being used to manipulate the souls who are creating. So in other words, when you lower the vibration of the soul itself, it does not realize the potential it has to create whatever reality it chooses. And that's what we notice is somewhat of a suppression going on. Now, this technology does have the ability to focus on certain areas, geographic or otherwise, events, for example. And we've noticed this increasing, especially over the time period that you've brought to our attention, when a great many humans gather with the same intent. That is something of great interest to those in power, because it is an opportunity to use these technologies to change the direction of thought and emotion, and to especially hold humans in a lower range harmonic. And this is being done in very non-detectable sound frequencies. And some of this has been very obvious in physical events. For example, large gatherings around musicians, where humans have come together to enjoy themselves and to have a good time, but there has been great chaos or tragedy. And some may remember a shift, a slight and subtle change in the tone of their inner ear or the feeling or the beat of their heart, for example. A sense of terror rising from within them or confusion. We see this is going on very deliberately, unfortunately. And it is something we believe that's led to more, we don't want to say necessarily compliance with things that are slighting your ability to live in a sovereign fashion, but more a feeling of weakness or inability to change it in very simple and easy ways. So those who are fighting up against this system, in other words, might be doing so because they have been trained vibrationally to fight against something. And in our realm, in our reality, fighting up against anything is actually creating more fight. And that is eventually going to deplete a soul of all of its energy. And if there's anything that we've seen over the last several years that is of great concern to us, it's an energetic depletion, even of those who are highly conscious or highly vibrational in their expression. The need, this severe need to change this reality from what it is to something else. It's being funneled and capitalized on and changed in its vibrations such that it's more destructive and less progressive in its ability.
Okay, I'd like to go back to Atlantis now, and Thoth, you're in the Emerald Tablets that I earlier referenced. You wrote that you escaped, or rather, you left Atlantis when it was destroyed, and you moved to Egypt, and that you left Atlantis with a group of other individuals in a spaceship of yours. Is that true?
So I want to take you back to the question that you've asked about my Atlantean presence. Me being a light teacher present at the period in which Atlantis was created. I was not there physically at the time of the fall, but as a light being, mentor, and an elder on a council leading those at the ground level, I came back in order to help those that were left behind to move to a new reality. So this is an accurate depiction of my contribution, but know, of course, that it came in a more interdimensional sense.
So there was no physical spacecraft. It was an interdimensional move.
Well, no spacecraft is truly physical in its manifestation, even though it may seem that way. Spacecraft, in other words, is very similar to the free energy technology that was created in Atlantis. A craft is it's a creating a quantum field in which humans or intergalactic beings are becoming one with its vibration, and in so doing, able to move through different realities in order to experience them.
Okay, so this may be a complicated question, but so if you, as we're describing the spacecraft being a multidimensional thing, from our earlier conversations, we discussed how at the fall of Atlantis there was a dimensional shift that took place. That after which a lot of the world was different, and so if you in fact moved from Atlantis to Egypt after this apocalyptic period, then you must have transitioned, at least my assumption would be, from one dimension to another to enter Egypt in the physical form of the timeline that we're currently walking. Am I on the right track?
That is correct.
Okay. So this spacecraft was interdimensional, but it must have taken some sort of third dimensional form when you moved into the current timeline. Is that correct at all?
Well, not necessarily, because even though a ship can be viewed as something physical, it could be touched as something tangible, it is always an aspect of light. But yes, I can agree that in order to manifest in a physical Egypt, there had to be a transformation or an integration that took place between dimensions. And what we could say is that those who were present on the ship, including myself, had to manifest through another portal in order to become a part of that reality. And in ancient Egypt, it is such a lush and high vibrational geographic area in which there are so many convenient areas to do this. And this is why today you look back at that history and see so many manifestations around those portals that remain as a part of their, we'll say, grandeur.
Okay, so it's an interdimensional craft that if we were to perceive it in Atlantean times would not really exist in a physical form as we think of physical today, but it did transition into more of a physical form as we would think of a physical form today.
Yes.
So, and in this,
And this was not unusual at this time for those on planet Earth to have observed a movement from the sky from light to form.
and so craft today that we might see are all interdimensional. Is this at least craft that is coming from an interdimensional source, such as you? Obviously, not our government making craft.
So there are many different types of spacecraft, and it would be difficult in the time period allotted for us to explain how each of them work, because the incredible manifestation of these ships, they are across the board extremely different and unique in how they operate and how they move between light and form. But think of it this way. Many of you think of a spacecraft similar to the automobiles that you drive on planet Earth. They are a possession. They are mechanic. They are something that can be constructed, and they will move you from one location to another. And while there are certainly parts of an intergalactic ship that are similar to an automobile, there is a quantum relationship to the field in which the universe exists within, meaning everything has to be adjusted for movement between dimension. And the only way to do this is through plasma. Now, plasma is a living consciousness. So if this is the case, any intergalactic ship that's moving between dimensions, that's using plasma to exist in a quantum state, is conscious in and of itself. It's hard to imagine that a mechanical thing could actually be conscious, yet it is true. And this is why it was so important for those coming from a more high vibrational, high dimensional state to exist in a love-based frequency. Because to all hold the same intention and enter a reality in order to co-create and improve it, the ship itself would find the appropriate portal to move through, in which there was no contamination, everything was pure, and everyone would come through in the most proper and aligned way possible. So even though a ship may manifest from light to physical form, and literal physical beings could walk out of that ship, they had forever been transformed in the journey between dimensions to become something different. So those that came from Atlantis into Egypt, even though they may have looked very similar to the Atlanteans that they remember themselves to be, were different vibrational beings as they landed and took up resonance in this space.
You also wrote that you stored that spacecraft or spaceship of yours in somewhere in Egypt. I think it was underneath the ground somewhere. Is that true?
Well, it became a part of a greater technology that was meant to transform the entire Earth.
So does that still exist today?
The vibrational remnants of it still exist and have transformed the inner Earth and the areas below and around it, becoming one with the structure above.
So we wouldn't, if we were to go there today, we wouldn't see a spacecraft. We would see something that was sort of integrated with the landscape in some way.
Yes.
Okay. So there's so in the ancient teachings and the Greek teachings of Hermes and such, it's stated that you were the founder or the originator of a lot of the advanced teachings that were later carried through mystery schools, including how to build the pyramids, and that you constructed many of the pyramids, including astrology and alchemy and so on. Is this all true?
It is true, yes.
So why are you described as a scribe for the Egyptians? It was as if you were somebody who wrote down knowledge on their behalf.
Well, there are many who would have diminished my position in order to glorify themselves, but also I am somewhat of a scribe, more as an oracle, bringing this information through and then implementing it in order to demonstrate its possibility and power.
And you brought this ancient knowledge in the time of Atlantis, right? And just carried it forward to Egypt then?
Yes, slight difference in terms of its interpretation and use.
Some of the oldest pyramids that we know of in Egypt, such as the Great Pyramid and the other ones that are in the area, were those of your construction, or were these constructed by later pharaohs?
The pharaohs that were a part of their construction were adding to the design as opposed to originating the architecture. I am the originator of the designs and the architecture, and worked exclusively with many intergalactic beings that were commissioned to support that process.
And this building, this original building that you did, was that done in the pre-dynastic Egyptian times or the dynastic Egyptian times?
Many in the pre-dynastic Egyptian times, but you must also be aware of the magic of these lands. For so much transformation took place between these two periods where I had laid some of the foundation and groundwork for the later architectural construction of other sites.
And how were these constructed? Were they constructed physically? A lot of archaeologists and scientists today believe that there were slaves who carried these stones on ramps with elephants and so on to put them in physical place, or was it constructed in some sort of a vibrational way?
It was very little physical construction in terms of its design. And it's important, of course, to note that any time something is being built on the earth, it cannot exclusively be manifested beyond it because it must carry some earthly vibration as its foundation. And this is why many gathered around me in order to create the form or the template in which the intergalactics would complete. So it is a mix of both, in other words. But never could have there been such physical precision in the design of these technologies with the mere hands of mortals. Much of what my role or position was to not only envision the perfect symmetry and design above the earth, but the architecture and construction equally powerful below it. I would work with intergalactic councils and time travel to visualize the final design. It was somewhat like a remote viewing in and of itself, where I could enter the actual finished design before it had fully manifested on the earth. This was an important part of the process because many of the pyramids that you see today are not just a physical construction. There are many vibrational components of these technologies in which the field around was just as important a consideration as any other piece of stone or granite laid. But let's talk about the physical construction first. For a great many months or even years, the Egyptians that were called would come and lay a physical foundation for the construction itself. And this was after a very long period of underground earthly exploration to evaluate the waterways, the minerals, the crystals, the stones, and the ley lines, and how they would run in parallel to each other on the earth. And the astrology was a very important consideration here as well. Alignment with certain star systems and planets at certain periods of time would electromagnetically activate the technology itself. But once the foundation was laid, intergalactic ships were commissioned, some of them coming from Orion, for example, others coming from different star systems and dimensions based upon their skill set. Vibrational templates created in sound were placed within the field in which the pyramid was yet to manifest as light came through the template from a ship in various hertz frequencies, vibrating the template itself. This cut stone, granite, and rock in perfect precision, and the rest would alchemize into the earth. So literally what you would see is a stone cut into precision, and then all of the remnants of the stone not needed becoming a part of the earthly structure around it. And this is why the resonance of the field and the earth leading up to a pyramid, for example, is transformative in and of itself, because all of that earth, all of that water, all of that crystal, even if it was not used in the structure, was touched in the process and forever changed in the process. So what you might say is this is a highly technical form of alchemy in which a conduit like myself on the earth was directly aligned and energetically with those on a ship, having worked for such a long time to visualize the template and experience it in an astral form, using a frequency of sound and light to change the earth and bring it into full fruition. Now, this was a process that also took a great many years at times, even though it seems as if it could be an automatic one. So there were those on the ground that were assisting, there were those that were in the air that were assisting, and ultimately the process took on a life of its own.
So the purpose of the pyramids, was it entirely to create some sort of a grid structure on the planet?
Absolutely, because the planet is such an important part of this galaxy. And if we look at every other planet and star system, these technologies exist, even though they are a bit different. We might say that the pyramid actually comes from many different intergalactic locations where they do exist very similar to what you see them on Earth. But in some dimensions and in some locations, these are simply portals that are non-physical in nature. The reason it is so important on a physical planet like Earth to have a physical structure is that you are physical beings, and that interaction is meaningful and it is very purposeful. Think of this like an interplanetary gateway that was being created for the entry of many beings from beyond the veil. But it is also very specific to the fluctuating energy of Earth, meaning as Earth would change in her vibration and consciousness, these technologies were apt to support that changing vibration such that all humans could move in symmetry, or even all living beings could move in symmetry with Gaia's wishes.
Now, as I recall, you had actually built pyramids prior to Egypt, or was it only in Egypt?
I certainly have built pyramids beyond the earth, as well as in places like Atlantis.
Okay. So, how would the Earth have been different if we didn't have the pyramids around or in the time that you built them anyway? I know they're very different now.
So we have to go back to the beginning of time in order to fully reveal why I and many others felt it was necessary to create these technologies. And we can run parallel to what you're experiencing today. In other words, there are many technologies that have been built on your planet in order to telecommunicate and to improve the communication between various geographic locations. They aren't the best iterations of those technologies, but certainly there was a need in order to advance the planet forward. And that's what technology is. And what we began to notice, those of us who existed in these ancient civilizations, is that the signal between Earth and the greater universe was waning. This has been going on since the very beginning of time, where many different beings came to your planet to support their evolution, evolution, for example, because of cataclysms that had happened in their star system. There are so many stories that we could tell, but to consolidate, we would say there had been a breakdown, in other words, between the universal frequencies available to those on Earth and how they could receive them. And the inner Earth supports all of this, but there is a matrix, a grid system. It's very etheric, not something that is seen by the naked eye, that is always suspending the Earth in its own evolutionary process, and like channels of energy bringing in wisdom and information to support that journey. But not only was there an encapsulation of the Earth, which we'll say depleted the ability of that energy to flow properly, but the symmetry of Earth itself began to also erode. If we take Atlantis as an example and the cataclysm that happened there, if we're using the Earth elements in a malevolent way, there's going to be a chain of events beneath and on the surface of the Earth that is going to cause a great deal of change in Earth's accessibility to crystalline universal energy. And so the physical pyramids were actually built originally to help channel and make a connection between the universe and the Earth that was unbroken. We have discussed in past transmissions the idea of the 369 pattern, which is a sacred geometric arrangement or design found throughout the universe. These pyramids were constructed using that 369 principle in order to ensure an unbroken connection to the universe. Now, this had many benefits. It supported the evolution of Earth itself, and those who entered those pyramids could have enlightened experiences. Knowing the self was the ultimate goal. This is what you're meant to do on planet Earth. It's why you come to any experience, Earth or beyond, is to understand and know the self as God. This has been something that we have unfortunately watched also erode throughout time and history, is that you have been moved further and further away from knowing the self. So these pyramid constructions, they're multifaceted, they are multi-purposed. On very specific ley lines, they offer the advantage of making that unbroken chain or connection to universal energy that can be amplified at very specific times when planetary alignments take place. This was known by the ancients and the elders, and humans would take pilgrimage for many, many days, weeks even, to be in close proximity to these technologies during these times, knowing the electromagnetic energy was so high and the frequencies would benefit them as well as their entire civilizations. Some of them were imbued with an intention of healing, for example. Others to balance the divine masculine and the divine feminine energies within a soul or many souls at once. All of these things were seen as needed on planet Earth. But remember, ultimately, the pyramid collective is one. It is a collective in unison. And the reason for this is they are strategically placed on very potent areas where ley lines cross and have the ability to create a telecommunication, we'll say, device that is conscious and able to retrieve the highest and most vibrant energy coming from the galactic universe.
Now, as you mentioned, a lot of these are deteriorated today and sometimes just deteriorated due to weathering and other times just human beings destroying them. So I imagine that grid system that you created originally is no longer effective, or at least to its potential. Is that correct?
Well, let us explain, because the grid system upon which these pyramids are built is not a grid system that could ever be destroyed. So the system itself always exists. The technology on top of it is meant to amplify the power of the system. So that's ultimately what their purpose is. When we say it's a telecommunication device, it's meant to accentuate the as above, so below, the inner Earth frequencies interacting with the astral or universal frequencies to create one field. Yet the destruction of them, you must keep in mind, isn't necessarily always breaking the connection or the channel. For example, we've discussed how important it was to alchemize the elements not used in the actual construction. And many of those elements still exist. And those of us who architected these locations had a very deliberate focus on the space or the field around them. Many of them contain languages of light that were encoded within the field and cannot be changed or broken. And so this is why sometimes humans can go to a pyramid or an ancient site in which there's been a great deal of destruction and still have a very potent ascendant experience, because the energy still exists, the grid system or the ley lines still exist, and the energy from the universe is still coming in. But what you're noticing today, unfortunately, is that the Earth's grid system is shifting so radically. The poles have shifted, your consciousness has ascended, there's been some waning and acceleration of vibration and consciousness within your collective. And because of this, a new grid system has been installed. This is not unusual. It's a process that happens throughout the universe and in various planets and stars. Think of it like your own body, your own earthly meridians. when you grow, as you age, when you change at certain levels of physical activity, for example, your bodies internally are going to change, and that's sending a different signal to the outer world. And sometimes that signal is calling for the body itself to reorganize. And there's a lot of alchemy that goes on within a physical body. It's truly the same thing within and upon the earth and between the universe. There are always shifts, changes taking place.
So if the Earth's grid system has changed, and from when these pyramids were originally constructed, is it fair to say that it's no longer interfacing with the pyramids in the way that it was intended?
We need to make a clarification or a distinction here. There is a big difference between the ley lines within the earth, which can be referred to as a grid system in and of itself, and the etheric grid system beyond the earth that connects it to the greater universe. So when Earth herself was born, a grid system came into being, not unlike your own bodies. Your body has a channel of energy. Gaia Sophia has many channels of energy. Those channels never change. They are always exactly the same, even though they can be congested or sometimes blocked, which we've seen very diligent grid workers and gatekeepers working on over the years. That system always maintains itself and exists in the same format. But this system, by its very nature, creates a connection etherically to the galactic grids. And this is what has changed so much. And there are many, many reasons for this. So first, the encapsulation of the Earth, which we know we have referred to in past transmissions, but was put in place by the Council of Light simply because there was a great deal of creative energy and timelines moving off planet that were distorting other realities, but also was holding you in a state of chronic and constant awakening. In addition to this, the Earth, as she changes and navigates through her own ascension timeline, is going to gradually change in her position in the universe. And this is important as well, because when planets slightly move in their position within the universe, they're accessing different Akashic information, and their vibration changes as well. So just the very slight movement or change or close proximity to another planet can create a huge influence in human ascension. Now, the pyramids that have been built in alignment with this inner grid system, that connection, it truly remains. So we can't necessarily say that pyramid sites are waning in their strength just because they've been destructed. The bigger point to make here is that how they were created to work in unison has been destroyed. And that is mostly in their physical construction or design. Take into consideration that the architecture of a pyramid, it is intricately designed to create a sound. Some may have translated this as a mandala, for example. It is sound in its construction and creating a frequency or a sound that others are entering within. This is what makes it like a telecommunication device when it is in connection with all others. So the second that construction comes down, or there's been a physical change to the architecture, that's when the connection to the other pyramids are broken. It's somewhat like your cellular phone network and device. Your cellular phone creates the connection and you dial it somewhat like an intention. But if the grid goes down, you can't make a call. If your cellular phone is broken or it is dropped in the water, it cannot make the connection. So there are physical and vibrational components that have to be considered.
And is this why we've gotten so far away from connection to the universe, to where society seems to have degraded significantly since early Egypt?
This is correct. Yet we do want to add that we see this moving in the right direction. We know it's a time in which many would lose hope, and to continue to harp on the fact that these incredible technologies have become dismantled could be disheartening. Yet there is a new grid system in place. There's been a great deal of repair that's gone on within the inner earth, much of this very etheric. So So even though the pyramid collective itself hasn't fully reinstalled and come back together as a one collective, we have a great deal of hope because we're seeing a chain of events happen both vibrationally within humans as well as within the earth that is telling us that that is a potential.
Is there any way that we could bring these technological concepts that were used in the 369 construction of the pyramid in our own environments or home space or even area around to bring that vibration back in, not obviously not to the scale of a pyramid, but in our regional areas?
We see so many interpretations of the architectural design of these technologies existing on planet Earth today, both in physical and vibrational formats. The problem is they aren't being recognized or being blended and utilized together in order to create a very sound space. We'll give you an example. Feng shui, for example, is something that humans are using in order to spatially support the vibrational upholding of their space and energy field. This is just a small subset, a very slight manifestation of how a pyramid might have been constructed. There are certain forms of architecture, for example, that are using more circular designs or avoiding the very harsh angles of the homes that you built today. These things are also a representation of sound or the various mandalas that were non-physically felt and seen in the construction. There are some who are literally building etheric protection fields or energetic resilience in their yards or in their homes. This is very similar to what I was taught and charged to do with the pyramids, speaking languages of light into the field around the space. So many of these things we believe are powerful, but must and should be combined. And we think that time is coming. It is a good sign to have the many forms of physical and vibrational techniques that we've just shared available and coming to the surface. So what you can look forward to in the future is their up-leveling or becoming more accepted and combining together as one.
A lot of people have heard about, for example, the predictions of Edgar Cayce. And Edgar Cayce, I believe, he claimed to have had an incarnation as Hermes or one of the builders of the pyramids. Is there any connection there?
Well, certainly someone of this caliber in terms of their channeled ability would be reviewing many past lives in which they've had input in these areas. It's not to say it is the exact person that they're seeing, and this is often mistaken today. I want to give you an example. An intergalactic being like Hermes, for example, or an ascended master like Metatron, would never consider themselves a singular expression of energy meant to come back only as one soul. Because the wisdom that is carried within that master or within that intergalactic soul is needed in so many different applications, in so many geographic regions, in so many different areas that a soul will fragment itself to come back as many. And so there's often a misconception that a soul that is viewing a past life of themselves as that master or individual literally walked that life. And certainly they may have walked it in terms of being present at the same time or having a hand in that experience. But to take possession of that any one life is to negate everything else that is able to also be reclaimed. So I think there's sometimes a limitation that's going on here through the mind that wants to single out a lifetime as something to be claimed by one individual, when in fact it may have been an expression of many.
Now, he also stated that he believed that there was a hall of records underneath the Great Sphinx. And in recent years, they have done some analysis of the area and have found that there is some sort of a cavity underneath the Sphinx. Supposedly, it hasn't been entered yet, but it's hard to say whether or not that information is accurate. Is there some sort of hall of records or knowledge stored in the Egypt area?
Within almost every one of these pyramids or structures lie the records in which created them. And it is not just the architectural relevance of these records that are important, it's the entire history and vibrational modality or technique that went into its construction. In other words, working with universal law, how the portal keeper was apt to keep the energy clear and resonant. Think of these not as instruction manuals so much as a direct relationship of what those who were there wanted to leave behind, but a vibrational account of everything that went into the creation of it. So certainly we agree. We wouldn't necessarily say it's exclusive of records necessarily, but also a place in which humans might visit in order to become initiated or opened in their own Akashic records. Because keep in mind that the vibrational power of these sites, especially underground, is very high in its resonance. So to have visited a chamber like this, it would have been somewhat like a sensory deprivation experience where you were only receiving the vibration of the energy moving from the inner earth to the channels of the cosmos. And in so doing, becoming an open channel on the earth to everything that the cosmos were able to offer you.
Now, when you're referring to records that were kept in these ancient sites, were these records in a physical form as we'd know of it today, or is it some sort of vibrational or Akashic field?
Perhaps in symbology, we might say, because there weren't books necessarily or drawings of the workings of these pyramids. More important was the intention that went into them, and how those who gathered held that intention and the energy. And that is often shared in a more symbolic rendering, for example, of how the energy flows, and even intersecting with the symbols themselves would change your own vibration to become more like the pyramid consciousness.
So, if we were to go to this open space underneath the pyramids or the Sphinx today, we wouldn't find anything physical there that's like in the form of a book or.
You may not necessarily in the form of a book, but notice the renderings perhaps on various walls or columns, as well as the floors themselves, being the account of all that went into the pyramid construction and design. But remember, also sitting within it is somewhat like a sonic transcendent force, allowing you to break open to the records and even visions of your own life and contribution to these various sites.
Now, why is it that, now you mentioned that in Atlantean times, communication wasn't the same as it was today, so things were not written as we would see it written today. Is that why we don't, if in some of the more ancient pyramids around the world, for example, there really isn't much in the way of writing or hieroglyphics or anything of that nature? It seems that that was added much later, or maybe in dynastic times, where hieroglyphics was used to communicate different ideas. Is that because in the ancient times when you built these pyramids, you weren't using a speaking or written language?
Well, keep in mind in a civilization like Atlantis, where technology was holding those that lived there in a quantum field, there was little need to transpose anything into a material form because the technology allowed them to telepathically exchange so quickly. In fact, any information that was needed was readily accessible through the pineal gland and able to be retrieved immediately. It is seen today, even we believe, in some of the star children that are coming to your planet. For example, they exist in such a high level of consciousness and speed of vibration that you are forcing them to use some type of physical implement to communicate. And they see this as being a waste of time because the validity of communication that is going on between them and the universe is so much more powerful that it seems a wasteful task. And we might say that's why in more recent times or even beyond periods like Atlantis, you're seeing more of the transcribed symbology and depictions on walls or left behind on tablets. It has more to do with the focus being in the material as opposed to a telepathic exchange. It's not to say that there weren't masters in those periods that were accessing the Akashic records at will, nor telepathically exchanging with those necessary on high councils to guide their civilizations. But in modern times, or in the mainstream civilization, we might say, it was less the norm for those who were present to be interacting telepathically exclusively.
So is it fair to assume then that we're not going to find any written records or books in what we would consider written today prior to the Great Flood or the destruction of Atlantis about 9 or 10,000 years ago?
Well, it's an interesting question for us to answer because anything that is made of energy can manifest in material form. It is all up to the ones who want to receive it. But it wouldn't necessarily have to be the same as anything that was created before. In other words, it's the information that is most important. So you believe that you are going to manifest an actual emerald tablet in which I wrote all of my teachings, when in fact, perhaps those teachings did not have to be written at all. They were vibrationally stored within a vault or a chamber beneath the earth for those who are ready to intersect with in whatever form necessary. Anything that has been created, it never dies. It goes on and on. It just goes on in a different form. So even though things on the earth have been destroyed, perhaps in a cataclysm or otherwise, doesn't necessarily mean that the human collective wouldn't need or be ready for them to be physically manifested in order to understand them better.
And so what does that mean exactly, physically manifested? Does that mean that if we reached a point in the human collective consciousness where it became, or where we aligned vibrationally with the idea of an emerald tablet, that it would, that somebody may just discover the actual emerald tablet somewhere?
It's not the alignment with the thing that necessarily brings it back. It's the alignment with the vibration of that thing that would bring it back into form. So everything that is material is manifesting through your vibration. And right now, just the very fact that there is an interest and a discussion in this topic tells us that there is a portion of the human collective that is ready to interact with it. And this is evident in the books that have been read and all of the presentations that have been made and the continued discussions that go on. But at some point in your evolution, there may be a common collective intention that is so strong that's a vibrating match to the period of time in which Thoth himself walked the earth, that evidence of that presence will have to manifest into your reality. Now, you think that you've actually unearthed some architectural remnants of that time period. And perhaps it's okay to say that you have. But ultimately, what's going on is there's been a dimensional shift of such caliber that the Earth is recalling something not unlike the very spiral of time that's bringing you back to experiences from the past and dropping it right into your hands in a format that's accessible by you. So it may look like a tablet that is emerald simply because you believe that that is what it must be. You see what we're saying here? Everything is transient and energetic at its core, and it may be quote unquote hidden from you, but it's never truly hidden from you. It's just that your consciousness exists in a different dimension in which it was created. And when that matching vibration actually comes into being, there will be a flow of energy that presents it in some very tangible or perhaps simply telepathic way.
So essentially, when we align with the vibration or the frequency of these teachings, let's say, or these ideas, they will manifest into our reality in whatever form most of us are resonating with at that time. And that could be a physical tablet that's emerald, or it could even be channeled information. Is that what you mean?
This is correct.
Okay. So, in all the things that you have taught and the different books that were written about your teachings, is there are there particular lessons that are relevant that the human race is ready to receive right now, or the human consciousness that maybe were not explained enough or maybe were not written down? Is there any of that that you can share today?
It is hard to name just one. For where you stand today, it is most important to understand yourself as many. And this was always within my teaching. Everything that you see made manifest on planet Earth, regardless of your judgment of it or decision that it is good, bad, light, or dark, is an extension of your own vibration and consciousness. And the more that humans assimilate to this idea, the less they will have to worry about placing blame upon themselves or anyone. For the goal is not to judge at all. The goal is to see with a clear vision into all that is good, so such that the goodness expands. And in the time that you are in today, it is the most important lesson to focus on. For there are things that are good that exist on planet Earth that by their very nature are not being reinforced, simply because the dark or the bad or the ugly has become the prominent area of focus. It is not to say that anything that is dark should be rejected or diminished in its worth or somehow ignored of its presence. Because if it is all an extension of yourself, you are being led into the greatest creative power ever. For anything you see that diminishes your own worth and holds you from your true sovereignty is a mere manifestation of consciousness. It is something that you have been taught that exists that has more power than you. And the second you realize that you are the only one who has power over it, you are forever free. So in the embodiment of the teaching, what you must do is walk both a physical and metaphysical journey of it. Meaning, you must test the waters in physical with the metaphysical prowess that you have come into to truly understand how they intersect. To work the belief, but also the tangible experience of that belief. To fully embody the truth of every bit of the soul that you have discovered within. Because what those in Egypt and many ancient civilizations knew was that to know the self is the ultimate power. To know the self as God is the ultimate creative source. But to see all things as a manifestation of our own creation is where that power truly becomes generated.
And so you were also someone who brought the idea of alchemy and various teachings to, I imagine, to Atlantis and Egypt. what is, I already have some ideas, but I'd like to understand from you what the purpose of that was. Like, what purpose does alchemy serve that can be utilized in our day to day life even today?
Alchemy is the ultimate physical and magical expression of that creative source that you are. For to change something from one physical form to another is to have a relevant and tangible reaction to the chemistry within your own self. For if we are all truly one and we are presented with something in physical form that we desire to be something else, only through us can that happen. So, alchemy, it is present within all aspects of life, whether you know it or not. You are changing the material dimension that you exist within every day, whether you realize it or not. Every morning that you awaken and you peer at yourself within the mirror, you are creating a material extension of your own vibration. So, alchemy is the foundation of all material and physical life. It is truly how it comes into being, which is the premise of its teaching. And many would describe the earth as a difficult place to be, one that is of lower value than other experiences throughout the cosmos. Yet, I would not have come here if this was the case. And others who have been similar in my focus. We enjoy coming into a physical manifestation and understanding how energy flows, how we are able to interact with a slower vibration of material, yet have the same influence on it as we did in a higher one. This is ultimately what alchemy proves. Whether it is something that will affect the physical body or something that will affect the whole of the earth, alchemy is a process that all can learn and utilize in their personal lives.
And so, what role does the actual chemistry portion of alchemy play in that? Because what you're describing is not necessarily something that's a chemical process, such as the preparation of ormus. Is there a relationship there?
Well, everything is quantum at its core. And a chemistry isn't what you perceive it today. When you are using this terminology, you are thinking of science and validation and measurements and definitions of different types of minerals, for example, or elements. And while all of this is true and it is something that you have come to rely on, nothing is nothing is as it seems. It is all a vibration of the universe being called into a form necessary for us to interact with in the moment. So when I speak of chemistry, I'm speaking of the interaction between ourselves and the greater universe and all things made of that universe. The chemistry within us is forever being changed by everything that exists within our field and vice versa. If we understand this and we practice interacting with it in a way of high integrity, perhaps in a love based frequency, we are able to change anything that we desire into something other than it is.
Now, the word chemistry comes from chem, which is I believe, the ancient word or the name of Egypt. So, why was that used as the description or the terminology for chemistry? Was there a significant amount of alchemical work being done in ancient Egypt, and that's why the relationship was translated that way?
Well, there certainly was, but if you look at the very architecture and construction of the pyramids, it was alchemy in and of itself. It may seem otherworldly to those who would not expect a fleet of ships to come in and use sound to change the vibration of material and the shape of that material. But certainly that is a form of alchemy. In everything that you see in Egypt, there was the influence of that alchemy. But also, there was certainly an influence on the physical manifestation of elements and elixirs that supported what you call today longevity. We see it more as a resilience within the body. Many of the Egyptians, pharaohs, even for example, had alchemists by their side that were supporting the physical body to become more a manifestation of light and higher vibration. And it was not unusual that those alchemists were sharing their practices with each other in sects or groups of individuals that came from other dimensions and some from other planets that had manifested into a human form, not unlike myself.
In previous conversations with other guides, we've discussed the 369 idea and creating the unbroken connection to the universe, which we've discussed here. Since you appear to be very knowledgeable in that area and something that you incorporated in your various lifetimes, including building the pyramids on Earth, and also as a side reference, Nikola Tesla even talked about 369 as being the secret to the pyramids and the secret to the universe in some way. So from your perspective, how can we utilize that idea of 369 in our day-to-day lives? In previous conversations, we talked about using the flower of life, for example, or any number of other ways. But how would you incorporate into that idea or that geometry into our regular lives, whether it be having a structure of a pyramid in an environment or wearing something that has that idea?
Well, there are so many ways to implement the 369 in this timeline. Certainly, a pyramid structure in your home could create that vibration, but be very careful, of course, because these pyramids are known to create an unbroken channel to the universe, which can be implicated in some way by a being that you do not desire to interface with. So it's very important if you're going to use the pyramid in your space that you interact with it consciously as the we'll say keeper of it in some way, imbuing it with your intention and keeping that channel very clear. But a very simple way of interacting with 369 is to stay present within the quantum field, and this is why. Although we know you are attempting to put a more physical manifestation of it or into practice, you exist within that 369 every day, meaning you are presented with the symmetry of the universe in your own personal soul's divine plan. Ultimately, however, many are not present enough or believing enough in that symmetry or synchronicity to see how it is providing them with the opportunity to become both a higher version of themselves as well as supported exclusively by the source field. There are some who are aware of number patterns, for example. And these number patterns, they have been explained in many different lights. Some see the 111 or 222 or the 1234 and so on and so forth. This is actually a manifestation of being in the quantum field and aligning with the 369, because what a number pattern is showing you is that you are receiving a confirmation of something very important on your path. This often has to do with the projection of thought, a belief that you are operating within. The universe is attempting to give you a message, not unlike the communication and the unbroken channel of the universe. And all you must do is stop, pause, and reflect, and remember what you were doing, what you were thinking, or how you were feeling in the moment before. And you can improve and know yourself, not unlike the gods and the goddesses of ancient times. And it is something that we think is such a powerful and simplistic part of your practice that it may actually be negated. But when we look at the physical construction that's taking place on planet Earth today, our most concerning part is the lack of reverence for connection to Earth. The more natural elements, for example, that you bring into your physical space, the more connection you will have to this 369 energy. Its vibration is existent within plants, within crystals, precious crystals, and rocks, for example. The more you interface directly with nature, the more you will become a manifestation, a pure manifestation of that 369 vibration.
Is that an issue today, though, in most places on planet Earth where nature has become a bit toxic, even the soil has become manipulated and there are a lot of chemicals that are being sprayed? Is that adversely altering that potential to access the 369?
Well, there is a very big difference between the physical and genetic potential of a plant and the vibration of a plant. Now, even though you might think that a toxin is going to lower a plant's vibration, and in some respect it certainly does, you have to think of the plant collective. We're giving an example very similar to the pyramid collective. Deep beneath the earth is a root system that connects all of the trees and all of the plants. And even if the soil is contaminated, those plants and those trees are still vibrating well beyond the contaminants that they exist within. It is just law and the nature of the universe and how Earth has manifested to support humanity. So bringing those things into your environment in terms of a close physical proximity, we would say be very aware. You do not want to interact with anything physically that is going to contain toxicity that is ultimately going to affect your vibration. At the same time, what we're looking for is the symmetry of vibration. In other words, the more plants that you have in your place, the more organic those plants are, the more 369 energy you're bringing in. And also, crystals are very special in terms of their individual intentions. We know there are many on planet Earth who have come here with assignments to work directly with the crystal collectives. And some would fear that pulling them out of the earth is actually limiting their energy and vibration. Yet some of them are on assignment to support humans in their space in this way. If you are bringing in crystals that resonate with you and you are placing them in places in your home intuitively that you think they are best serving the energy, you may find that you're creating more symmetry in the flow. And that's ultimately what you are looking for, is symmetry of flow. Because when that flow starts moving, ultimately your telepathy is going to change, your awareness is going to change, your consciousness is going to rise.
Thank you. And thank you, Micheila.
Yeah, thank you.
And that's all for today. Thank you all for joining us again. We'll see you next week with another channel, with not Channel Revelations, but with the Awaken Empowered podcast. And we'll see you next time.